I heard that little chuckle. I'm glad to see you. For those of you that may be out in the parking lot, hope you've got a raft. If you need something, just row up to the front door. We can't open it, but we'll wish you good luck. For those of you, I know we've got several probably at home tonight. With the weather coming in like it is and the roads kind of being iffy in some places, I know we've got several that are watching from home, and thankful for you tuning in. Glad that you can see us. We hope to see you as soon as possible, as soon as you're able. I do want to say a word about tomorrow night for our folks watching at home, our folks listening out in the parking lot, and our folks in here. These discussions have really been fantastic. That has nothing to do with me, quote unquote, leading it. I don't really like that term. I kind of come up with a topic, and my goal is to not talk much. Inevitably, I have to talk some to keep things moving, but they have been really, really awesome. And if you're able, tomorrow night at 6:30, come and just take part. It's not like anything you've been a part of. At least I can say that I've been a part of at any congregation I've gone to. Typically, and I say this as much on myself as I do anybody else, even the Bible class format like tonight lends itself to what we call sort of a lecture style teaching. Whereas one person stands up, has the microphone, and they do most of the talking, if not all of the talking, and the only communication done between the teacher and the audience is maybe a sentence-long answer or maybe a couple of words here or there. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes you get a lot out of it, but sometimes that can be really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why David and I had this conversation back in the fall about doing this discussion and picking a day and picking a time and just setting it and just sticking to it. And we've kind of tried the time a little different once, and that didn't go so well. So we moved it. We've just kind of kept it at 6:30, and it has really been good. We talked about prayer last Thursday night, and I know for me personally, it was a great encouragement to me. I left there with sort of some challenges in my own personal prayer life, sort of some goals that I set for myself following that discussion. And I will tell you, this past week has been awesome. My prayer life has been awesome. So I just wanted you to hear that and know that up front. And if you're able, I get it. I know what some people think. Some people think, I came on Wednesday night at 6:30. Why would I come back? I just don't think you can get enough of this. So the question really isn't, why would you? It's really, if you can, why would you not? So I challenge you, tomorrow night, 6:30, Annex. It's been fantastic. It's really been great. And I encourage you to come, be a part of that. Okay? All right. We're going to cover Matthew 12, Mark 2, and Luke 6. Luke 6, we won't pay attention to as much as Matthew 12 and Mark 2. So if you want to kind of put your ribbon in Mark 2 and us go back and forth from Matthew 12 to Mark 2, that would probably be the best case for you as far as what we're discussing tonight. We've been moving our way through, we're in week 10, which is hard to believe. We're in week 10 of what we have termed the greatest story ever told, and we are full-fledged in the middle of Jesus' early ministry. He is doing some incredible things, and he is being treated, in some places, he's being treated very well. He's being treated like he should be. He's being treated with respect, with honor. They're amazed at the things that he's doing and saying. And in some places, not so much. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at Luke chapter 4 when he went home to Nazareth. And he stood up in front of them in the synagogue and he read scripture and he said, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your presence." And they went from being amazed at his words to taking him, dragging him out of the city and threatening to throw him off a cliff. So in some places, he's being treated as the king as he should be. In some places, not so much. In this particular account, Matthew 12, verses 1 to 21, and then Mark 2, the comparable passages, Mark 2:23 through Mark 3:12. So it covers a couple of chapters there. I sort of entitled this, Two Stories and a Fulfilled Prophecy. Two stories and a fulfilled prophecy. This little section is a really powerful section for a lot of reasons. We're going to try to cover a few of those. But let's begin. Let's begin in Matthew chapter 12. Let's begin in verse 1. We're going to read down to verse 8. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Let's first look at the accusation. The disciples are hungry. They're tired. They've been traveling. And as they pass through a grain field, they do what was a common thing to do. If you know anything about the agricultural mannerisms of the day, this was not abnormal to see. This would have come after the field has been taken care of for harvest. They would typically leave the corners for travelers or for those who had nothing. So a lot of times as people would pass through the grain fields, the corners of the field would be left specifically for those that were traveling or those who may not have enough. So this was not uncommon. This was not odd to see someone pass through a grain field, pluck the head off, and begin to sort of get themselves a little bit of a snack as they pass through. Not abnormal at all. Here's the problem. The Pharisees are trailing Jesus and his disciples, watching their every move. And when they see them do this, they know there's nothing wrong with what they're doing, except that it's when? It's on the Sabbath. Are you familiar with the term nitpicking? Are you familiar with that term? I've used that term a lot as a teacher, as a coach, even as a parent. You'll say, well, now you're just nitpicking. What does that mean? Somebody help me out. What does that mean? Finding something to have a problem with, right? And a lot of times when you nitpick at something, you are finding something that truly is as minor of a detail as you can possibly find, and you try to blow it up into a major problem. Now, I know that doesn't happen in modern day world, does it? We don't have that issue in our country, do we? We don't have that issue in the church, do we? Can you sort of figure out the sarcasm that comes with those words? What do you think social media has become? It is the capital of nitpicking central. Guys, we are in the midst of what is being commonly referred to, used on every network, as cancel culture. Many of you may not know this because hopefully you're like me and you don't watch the news very often, but every now and again some story will come across and it'll grab my attention. Did you know that just a week ago they made a declaration that the cartoon character Pepe Le Pew is no longer allowed to be drawn or put in any Looney Tunes cartoon? Did you know that? Do you want to know why? Because in the cartoons, okay, that were drawn 60 years ago, Pepe Le Pew, a skunk, believes that this cat is a female skunk, and he holds her and kisses her. Now, here's what our culture has done. They've taken the picture of a skunk cartoon holding a cat cartoon and kissing it. And here's what they said. It's an unwanted sexual advance. Therefore, we must cancel it. It must not be shown on television ever again. And can you believe that Looney Tunes, Warner Brothers, said, you know what, you're right. You're right, it's offensive. Now, you tell me, is nitpicking an issue in our country, in our culture, in our world? Yeah. You say, well, at least it doesn't happen in the church, right? Wrong. I've seen people leave angry from worship services over some things that I couldn't help but just sort of shake my head at. Things like the thermostat. Well, I was cold in there. Why didn't y'all turn the heat on? Well, it's 94 outside. You have on 3 jackets and a shawl. We figured you were covered. Leave angry. Go to the elders. Meet with the elders over the thermostat. Is it a problem? Yeah. Know this, it was a problem way, way long time ago too. Now, do they think it's nitpicking? Do the Pharisees believe themselves to be nitpicking this issue? No, not at all. You see, they think this is a major, major issue. They see Jesus and his disciples doing something that is totally against the law. Totally against the law. Now, notice the second part, which is Jesus' response. The response of Jesus sees him answer their accusation with one of his own. Did you see the accusation? Look closely now. The whole point of this whole series of study is to look at these stories, look at these accounts with a fresh look, with a magnifying glass. Did you notice the accusation? His accusation is what? It's the first 4 words in English Standard Version in verse 3 that he says. Have you not what? Read. Now, did you catch that? That's his accusation to them. Have you not read? He says it twice. In Matthew chapter 12, he says it in verse 3, and he says it again in verse 5. Now, wait a minute. They're accusing Jesus and his disciples of doing something that is breaking the law. And yet, if you look in verse 5 closely, what does Jesus say? Or have you not read in the law? The very thing you're coming after me about, you seem to have ignored some things in. Now, the first thing that he brings up, man, you're talking about a great example. He grabs this example of David eating the showbread. And I'm telling you, if you go back, and we don't have time this evening, but if you go back and you read that example, you're going to find that basically these were things that they were okay with, those scenarios. But yet when Jesus did this, his disciples did this, they had an issue. And what Jesus is wanting them to see is the intent of God's law versus what I would say would be the literal letter of the law. The intent of God's law versus the literal letter of the law, the actual wording. Because there was no doubt in their mind, David was the superhero, wasn't he? Did the Pharisees like David? Oh man, yeah. I mean, it was like Abraham 1, David 1A in their book. They loved David. When Jesus brings up this example, this is David breaking the law, is he not? What David did he break the law? Yes or no? Absolutely, without a doubt, he broke the law. He ate the bread that was specifically for the priests. Can't do that. And even if you wanted to say, well, he was God's chosen man, so that's okay. Well, then why did he feed it to the rest of the people that were in his party? See, that you can't get around that. What David did was breaking the law. And Jesus says, but yet, look at what he says. You not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how they entered the house of God, ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who are with him, but only for the priests? Woo! Jesus says, okay, so let's talk. Let's real talk. You want to come after me and the men that are with me? Now you're gonna have to backtrack. And you're gonna have to call David a blasphemer of the law or a breaker of the law. You're gonna have to do that. It's the second, if you want to call it an accusation, it's the second response, though, that drives even deeper at their problem. Have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? The best way I could sort of wrap these things up is in Mark 2. This is where I want you to kind of flip back. If you go to Mark 2 and the account there, Mark gives us one more statement that Jesus makes. And it's in Mark chapter 2, it's in verse 27. After he had said these things, and in Mark 2 we only get the example of David and the showbread. But then you get to verse 27 of Mark 2, and Jesus tells them the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath was made for man to be blessed by God with a day of rest. Made for man to be blessed by God. The intention in this case outweighs the literal letter of the law, if you will. What Jesus is telling them is you are attempting to condemn me and the disciples that are with me on something that you truthfully don't understand fully. Now, we've brought this up before, but it's hard to argue with Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 20, when he literally says out of his own mouth, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. It's really hard to argue with him when he consistently and continuously, time and time again, defends the law, carries out the law, and as a matter of fact, puts even greater restrictions on those who follow the law. It's hard to argue. This is cleared up by Jesus. The intention discussion is cleared up by Jesus when he reminds them that God did allow certain works on the Sabbath. The works of the priest, if you want to call them that, if you want to call them the work. And even medical work was openly allowed. He's going to mention that in our second account that we're going to look at in just a second. Talk about it. If something happened to one of your children, would you not help him? Would you not save him? Jesus has brought that point up, and he will bring that point up multiple times to them on this discussion about the Sabbath. He's going to say, you would do what it was necessary to save a life. Now, would you not call that work? And of course, their answer would have to be yes. So if you would allow those things, ultimately, Jesus states boldly and bluntly what they had better come to grips with. Matthew 12 and verse 7, or verse 6, excuse me. Matthew 12 and verse 6, Jesus explains to them very directly what they had better understand. I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. Jesus has used that statement, and he uses that statement multiple times. He doesn't always say it about the temple. There are times where he says, there's something greater than Solomon is here. He'll input names or he'll input things, and he'll say there is something greater that is in front of you. And the idea being, you just are going to have to open your eyes. Now, the concept is, okay, physically open their eyes are wide open. No, that's not it at all. It is those eyes of faith. You see, what they saw was Jesus and his disciples plucking the heads off the grain, and by doing so, they were spitting on the law. They were disrespecting the law. They were breaking the law. They were being as disrespectful as any person could be because they were working on the Sabbath. Jesus tells them what you don't realize is, what you obviously don't realize and what you obviously don't see is there's something far greater than the temple in front of you. And he closes that, verses 7 and 8 of the Matthew reference. He closes that by saying to them, first of all, a statement they didn't know anything about. A statement that they didn't understand, a statement that they did not grab a hold of. If you look there in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 7, it is a reference, it is a quote from Hosea chapter 6. So think about, wrap your brain around what Jesus is doing as he talks to the Pharisees. Look at what he's done. He's used a reference about David. He's even brought up the fact that the priests do work and are held guiltless. So he's gone back to their literal reading of the law, and now he closes his argument, if you want to call it that, in verse 7 with a quote from one of their prophets. And what he says is the third and final accusation in this brief little interaction. And it's these words: if you had known what this means. If you had any idea what this means, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Now, he has exonerated the disciples that are with him. Jesus says, I've tried them and they're innocent. You can't hold anything against them. They're guiltless. But it's that quote from Hosea that is so weighty, it's heavy, it's impactful. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now, if you remember, there is a moment in the life of King Saul where Saul makes the worst decision that he ever made in his entire life. And he determines that it's okay for him as the king to offer a sacrifice to God, which was not his job, not his assignment, and it was not okay. And do you remember, what did Samuel say to Saul when he got to it? To condemn his actions and his decision. What were his words? It is better to what? Obey than to sacrifice. Now, if you plug that idea right here with what Hosea said, you find what the intention of the law is truly about. This is what Jesus is trying to get them to see. Obedience to God, yes, absolutely. Obedience to God even supersedes obedience to the law, yes or no? Yes. They couldn't, that didn't compute to them, because to them the law was like this. It was like this. And they would say with their mouth that their obedience to God was like that. But truthfully, their actions said it was kind of like this. We think the law, man. Because to them, they believed as long as we kept the law here, then God was okay with us. And Jesus says, you got it. You're enforcing the literal letter of the law, and you're totally removing the intention of it. Does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound like another speech he gave to the Pharisees? Do you remember what he told them? You're worried about the tithing of the mint and the cumin and all of those things, and you're ignoring what? What did he say? What did he call them? The weightier matters. What were those weightier matters? You remember? Justice, mercy. It's the same conversation he's going to have with them, sadly, over and over and over again. Because they took the law and they did like this, and they said nothing can touch the law. And Jesus came along and said, you're right, the law is great, the law is good, but it does not supersede your obedience and your love for God. Paul's going to run into the same thing, is he not? Paul's going to run into the same argument with a lot of the same type people. Maybe not the same person exactly, but the same type people who are going to look at the law and say, but Paul, you don't get it. The law is it, man. And Paul's like, no. No. You look at Romans chapter 4 specifically. Whoo! Man, oh man. Romans chapter 4, does Paul not lay down the law to them? No pun intended. Actually, pun totally intended. Because his accusation is what in Romans chapter 4? There's your reading assignment for the week. Go read Romans chapter 4. What is Paul's expectation of what they're going to hear from him? It's his explanation, that's a better word. Explanation to them is, well, okay, if you guys want to put the law up here, then what are you going to do about Abraham? It's commonly referred to as the law of who? Who? Moses. Moses come before or after Abraham? After. So Paul's argument to them in Romans 4 is, if you're going to tell me that the law is the only thing that matters, then what are you going to do about Abraham? Guess what? They don't have an answer for that. Paul knows it, and he teaches a great lesson in Romans 4 about the importance of faith. Man, it's good stuff. We don't have time to get into it. I got to move on. The other story happens in Matthew chapter 12, verses 9 to 14. And it's a lot of the same material, so that's why I kind of spent more time on the first one, because this one is very similar. One is a teachable moment out in the field. This is a teachable moment in the synagogue. So verse 9, Matthew chapter 12, verse 9, he went on from there and he entered their synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. They haven't even learned their lesson from the field yet. They're just taking it on into the synagogue. Jesus is fine with that. He's ready to teach them. He said to them, which one of you, as a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Or how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. The man stretched it out. It was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. Their reason for accusing him is not some wholesome, righteous, spiritual reason. It's for their own personal gain. It's to secure their position as the religious elite. They're frustrated by Jesus because it seems like every time they ask him a question, he's not only got an answer, but he's got a question back at them that they can't answer. And there's a reason for that, obviously. The application here appears to be twofold. Number one, eyes are watching for all manner of reasons, some good, some bad. Therefore, let us strive to live in such a way that when someone tries to accuse us, it comes off as completely foolish. If you want a reference, you can write down 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 13 to 18. Peter explains that better than I can even. The application is twofold. Here's the second one. It's shameful to claim to be a Christian and still be searching with our eyes for every person's wrongdoing to try and make ourselves look better. There's a twofold application. One, eyes are watching you. Some good, some bad, and that's just the way it is. Some people are watching you. They're trying to nitpick you. Trying to say, well, you call yourself a Christian, but yet this is what you said on this one time back in this other time that you did something that you weren't supposed to do. That's going to happen. Some people are watching you, and it's a good thing. Some people watch you and they say, man, I saw how you treated this person, and I saw how you acted with this person, and you know what, man, I really appreciate that. And I think of like, if you guys, and I don't want to embarrass anybody, I really don't. There's a video, I wish I could pull it up, and I can't, but there's a video of our little buddy, Jace Bassham. If you know Jace, you know Jace is just the coolest kid that ever walked on the face of the planet. I love Jace Bassham. And Jace got to play in a basketball game this past week or a week or so ago, and it was just the coolest thing. And like I said, I wish you could see the video, all the kids pulling for him and cheering for him. It's just awesome. It's incredible stuff. And that's when you see, people see those kinds of things, and they see how people interact with those kinds of people. Jace can't do anything back for those grown-ups that put him in that position to succeed. Jace can't do anything for them, but they did it for him because it was the right thing to do, because it was a good thing to do. You see, sometimes eyes watch that, and they're drawn to who you are and what you are by what they saw and the way you interacted for people who can't do anything for you. But the second part of that is also true. It is shameful because we, myself included, sometimes fall victim to this idea of us with our own eyes, our human eyes, looking for faults in people. We should be trying to build them up instead of tearing them down. Jesus' response, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? How can you answer that question? They're faced with the same type of dilemma as when Jesus asked them, the baptism of John, was it of heaven or was it of man? They know they can't answer that question. The Bible even specifically tells you that in that moment when they're asked that question, they openly admitted, we can't answer that. We don't know. Because if we say it's of man, then the people are going to get after us. If we say it's of God, then he's going to ask us why we didn't do it. Same situation, same scenario. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Well, if we say no, then wow. How does that make us look? But if we say yes, then we put ourselves in a really bad position with the guy standing in front of us. It's a powerful question. If you understood the intention of the Sabbath given by God, instead of merely focusing on the literal, they could have understood what he was asking and why he was asking it. Jesus is going to heal this man. There's no doubt about that as he's speaking. There are countless moments where Jesus sees people, sees their hearts, sees their faith, and heals them of their infirmities. However, in this case, there's an additional piece of information that makes this even more interesting. If you go to Mark chapter 3, go to Mark chapter 3. This is verse 5 of Mark chapter 3. There's one piece of information that I want to close with tonight. Mark chapter 3, verse 5. Before he heals the man, Mark tells us that Jesus looked at them. He looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Jesus is truly frustrated at the total unwillingness of those in attendance to appreciate and accept what they're seeing and hearing. The healing didn't change their minds, unfortunately. It didn't change their hearts, unfortunately. Rather, it pushed them even further over the edge, and they sought an opportunity to destroy him. But it's that phrasing that when Jesus looked at them, he saw them with anger. Had nothing to do with the man with the withered hand at that moment. At that moment, it had everything to do with those people that were standing in front of him who called themselves religious, who called themselves God followers, who called themselves keepers of the law. And Jesus says, yes, but your heart is so far from God, you don't even know how far you are. I guess the reason why that stood out to me is I started thinking about those times where I, personally, have stood there and nitpicked someone, or I've stood there and looked for faults, or I've stood there and I've tried to win an argument instead of show some compassion and some mercy. I stood there preparing my next comeback instead of actually listening to what's being said. I think about all those moments and all those times where I feel like if I could go back in time and Jesus were standing in the room somehow, he would look at me and be angry at my hardness of heart. He would want to grab me by the shoulders and shake me and just say, do you understand what you're doing right now? You've lost all focus on what it means to truly be my follower, and now you're just focused on you. You may be in that position tonight. Let me leave you with this thought. If you go back to Matthew chapter 12, there is a prophecy that is fulfilled, and I think it is worthy of bringing up at the end here. Jesus withdrew from the people after these things happened, and he heals all of them. It says many followed him, and he healed them all. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 15. In verse 16, he ordered them not to make him known. This was to fulfill the prophecy, and I want you to look at this prophecy. Behold, my servant whom I've chosen, my beloved with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him. He will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not, watch this now, he will not quarrel, cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not quench until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. You see, if you're a follower of Christ, could people say that your goal is not to quarrel? Or are you constantly looking for the next argument? Could people say that you're not one known for your whining and crying aloud? Or are you somebody that's all you're known for and that's all you do? When he says there that the chosen one would not be heard and his voice would not be heard in the streets, that doesn't literally mean he would not speak in the streets. It was to be one of those, we would call them street corner preachers, standing up on a box, screaming and shouting. That's not Jesus' style. He's not interested in the quarrel. He's not interested in the crying aloud. He's not interested in the street corner. You know what he's interested in? He's interested in people and their souls. He proves it yet again, and he proves it over and over again in these two accounts. He looks at some people that unfortunately look a lot like me, and he says, you've lost all focus on what you're supposed to be doing. Tonight, you may have lost focus. You may not be a Christian.